pretty excited. It's always fun to talk to people about plants. I don't do this very often, so I'm a little nervous, but that won't last long. So what I intend to do is just give you a little bit of background.
It's on now.
A little bit of background.
Yeah, turn that volume down a little. It just is annoying more than anything.
Is that better?
No.
Hello?
Move up. Yeah.
How's that?
Perfect.
How's that? Better? Okay. Anyway, my name is Renaud. Thanks again for having me. My company is called Plantas Nativas. It was founded in 1994, basically to provide commercial quantities of native plant seed to growers. So big nurseries like Four Corners, everybody know Four Corners Nursery? Okay. So they grow like big, 500-foot long rows of seed beds of almost 200 or more species probably. And they will actually seed a 500-foot row of vine maple next to a 500-foot row of cattails next to, and so our company was started because there was a shortage of that, producers for that kind of seed, and that kind of launched me into a whole career of native plants, including wetlands and gardening and estate gardening and big restoration projects with 10 or 15,000 plants per project. And so what I've been able to do is supply seed to these growers and then buy plants back, so we don't do any propagation, which is kind of a good thing because a lot of the seed growers, or a lot of the seed suppliers, also grow plants. So if you're a nursery and you're buying seed from another nursery, you kind of wonder what seed you're getting. Are you getting the A-grade seed or the B-grade seed or the right seed or the wrong seed? So this little niche has worked out really well for us. So we did that for about the first 10 years of our company. And I built houses along with that too, so I have kind of construction background too. But during that time, I was getting an environmental education degree at Western and started doing curriculum work for environmental education around wetlands, and that kind of launched me into the whole wetland science thing. And since then, done a fair amount of consulting and collaboration with engineers on wetlands and city stormwater projects, and so basically anything around native plants is kind of what I've been able to get my hands into over the last 20 years. Also including like very sophisticated engineered wetland systems that process all the septic water from 100 green dorms and environmental learning centers and really innovative projects like that. So I have lots of experience using these plants in small and big projects. And what would happen is we'd have these big projects and then I'd end up with a bunch of extra plants. So my yard quickly filled up with plants that became kind of, unwieldy, full of weeds, or, not shaped well. So our mission for Plantas Nativas has always been to promote native plants. And so to that end, we started a small retail operation just on weekends, actually a couple blocks from here, in the back of a convenience store that sold mostly cheap cigarettes and booze. And it turned out that there was really very little crossover between there and what we do. But it was a good start. It was right next to my house, and I made a gate through the fence so I could just go over there. I would basically clean seed all day while I was waiting for customers to come in. And surprisingly, a lot of customers, even though there were very few then, are still my main, clientele. So the people that use native plants are pretty passionate about it, and people actually seek us out because they're pretty hard to find at the retail level if you want 1 or 2 or 5 and not 500. So, like I said, our mission is to promote native plants, and so now we're located on State Street, a couple blocks south of the Herald Building. Who knows where our nursery is? Yeah, all right. I won't bore you with that. It's a cubby hole. Yeah, the mysterious place that looks like it may never be open, but it is. So our hours are Thursdays from 12 to 5 and Saturdays from 10 to 3. And the reason we have limited hours is because if we try to staff it every day, we'd have to probably double or triple our prices. So we're also open anytime by appointment if those hours don't work for you. And since our hours are kind of weird, we try really hard to accommodate everybody's schedule. So please don't, if you ever are curious and want to come see what we're doing, don't hesitate So what I've been doing in the talks I've been doing, instead of bringing a PowerPoint and just kind of talking at people, I like to just kind of get a little bit of background and then open up the floor to people's questions and kind of have a discussion about how to maybe, prepare soils or abate weeds or deal with rain gardens or the process or, knotweed or blackberry or whatever. And we've had a lot of experience trying to, fight these weeds that take over everything. And the other thing I want to say is I'm pretty passionate and pretty biased toward using native plants, but I don't really like to tell people what to do. So what I like to do is put all these biases out on the table and then make it work for the client or for you guys in this case. So, if you want to have blueberries in with your salal or have, a magnolia tree in the middle of all your, whatever, that's fine with me. I'm here to help with my experience, and if you have questions, I'd love to answer them. Or even stories of your own about things that didn't work and that we could share with everybody in the room here. So with that, I could keep talking all day about myself, or we could...
Have a question?
Okay.
So one of the big things that I've been really interested in is various treatments of stormwater. The idea of stormwater having non-point and point pollution. And I keep hearing, have this rain garden, you'll clean it all up, blah, 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 blah. But do you know anything about science on how long does it take? Does it really work?
A little bit. So, like I said, we've worked on these engineered wetlands that actually process septic water. And so I had to kind of get into the science about that to figure out which plants would work well for that. And it turns out that most of the process is done actually with the surface area of the gravel. So it's chemical reactions are what clean the water. Chemical reactions happen on the surface area of molecules. For instance, you maybe heard about using charcoal for soil amendment. Well, the reason that, from what I understand, and someone feel free to correct me, is that the charcoal are such a small particle that when you have a little bit of charcoal, you have a tremendous amount of surface area because you have way more surface area with millions of small particles than you do with thousands of big particles. Does that make sense? Okay. So even in the winter, the storm drains or the rain gardens process water and they clean the water because of the gravels and the sand, which is probably one of the best filter materials because of the small particle size. So really, even without the plants, you're processing water through these substrates that they built rain gardens with. And that's kind of my understanding. And then when you add the plants to it, they actually magnetically, like for instance, cattails, magnetically grab onto the turbidity in the water and hold it in the root and actually use it up. So that's kind of a kicker effect, but most of them I think are designed based on the volume and the particle size. To answer your question?
Yeah, because I look at some of these things around the city,
Yeah.
and these great big ponds, and it's like,
Yeah, so,
but I know we're moving more towards the smaller rain gardens. and
Yeah.
That kind of thing, because I think those ponds really didn't work. They seem to be great for growing invasives.
yeah. And they're very seldom maintained. And
Yes.
the ponds are a different story. So the open water pond is for detention, and that's to give water time to settle for the sediments to fall out. So I just did a little consulting job for a condo complex out by the new co-op. And it's an 8-year-old complex. And all their landscaping is 3 or 4 feet above the curbs. Do you live there? Okay. And so they have these 2 big stormwater ponds, and the lifetime for the stormwater ponds before they were supposed to fill up from the stormwater, engineers figured all this out, was 25 years. Well, in 8 years, the city made them pump them out because they filled up early to $100,000 cost. So they had to drain these ponds, bring in the bobcat, get all this goopy, anaerobic, nasty stuff out from a below grade pond up through the condos into a truck and truck it off somewhere. So basically all their soil is down to mineral soil, or basically it was like all 3 or 4 way mix brought in, engineered soil, and then they had no stormwater plans except for in the middle of all the driveways they have they have catchments that go straight to these stormwater ponds. So you can just see, it's just, yeah, it's just like gravity and these rivulets and like all the, classic erosion signs, and it all ended up in their stormwater pond. So they don't have any native plants. They have pretty aggressive landscaping. So what didn't run down in the stormwater pond was raked off and hauled off. So now they're gonna do an education campaign with the condo association, and they're going to redo a lot of the really problem areas to make sure that they don't have to spend this $100,000 again in 8 years. They want to actually, yeah, exactly. So let me know if I'm rambling.
Well, no, you're not rambling, I just want to make sure I understood the dynamics you just described.
Okay.
So they had this big catchment pond,
Mhm.
but they didn't think upstream to stop the erosion
Right.
filling. Otherwise, if they had landscaped with native plants, of course, it would have lasted 25 years.
Or even if they would have had some places where they would have directed the water to go and had some detention that they could clean out easily next to a sidewalk. Or, so basically rain gardens are kind of the solution for that system. And I know that the definition of rain gardens and the technology about whether it's an infiltration trench or a rain garden is pretty, there's a lot of theory, and it's an evolving field right now, so don't take me literally when I say rain garden or infiltration trench. It's just the idea of either allowing the water to perk into the soil or to have it detained and slowed down is really the idea. And what these were doing is they were all going, everything was going over the curb, into the stream, straight into the storm basin, and fast track right into the stormwater.
Would impermeable pavement of that
I think it has the potential to, but one of the problems with permeable pavement is it'll clog up. So, like, is anybody familiar with the project they did on Silver Beach? So what they did was there's a residential street that goes along Lake Whatcom, and they took the shoulders and they made them permeable concrete, I think it was in that one, right? Yeah, okay, and I've noticed that once a year at least, they take a pressure washer, and then they have that big vacuum truck, and they're actually cleaning out the permeable concrete. Because once it fills up, the water just sheds just like anything else. So, once again, it's kind of like maintenance and planning for maintenance and making sure that if you know you can have sediment moving, have it move somewhere where you can clean it out before it becomes a problem. And monitor it too for that. Does that make sense? Answer your question? Okay, great. Sure. Yes?
I was wondering if you have a compiled list of native plants that are deer tolerant.
Well, there's a lot of lists like that. A whole bunch of lists like that.
Like a bunch of things, taking out the lawn and
Lawn. Lawn, that would be the list.
That'd be
Well, I don't know. I mean, I've heard that rhododendrons don't get eaten by deer, but I've seen deer eating them. And that's kind of the big one. Oh, rhodies, And they maybe don't eat them down in the ground like they do a surfaceberry, So
They
it's...
seem to have left those red flowering currants alone.
Really?
Okay.
Has somebody else had that experience with red flowering currant? I've seen them eaten up pretty good.
I'm
So it might even be like what deer do you have?
I could plant for them,
Yeah.
and then you can enjoy what they couldn't get to.
Except they won't keep the diagonal form of their 9 mark, which is supposed to be.
The diagonal?
I planted it for them, but they're not eating the diagonal.
Yeah, it's a big issue. I mean, I've planted, extensive landscapes that are, oftentimes it'll be like someone cleared out a little area in the woods and put a perfect little house in the woods, and then we've tried to kind of create a transition from the woods into the house envelope because they like nature and that's why they move out there. So we put in these, they didn't want to wait very long. They were retired, so they wanted to start out with big stuff. So we bring in these beautiful Mirica, Californicas, and big reddish dogwoods, and within like 2 weeks, the branches are all broken and laying in the ground, and they're rubbing their antlers on them and just shearing all the branches off the side, and,
Do they have a freezer?
Bows and arrows.
Or a hunter friend?
or a dog.
Or a dog.
So, what we're seeing is really, and this is kind of off subject, but it speaks to almost every ecosystem we have on Earth now, is that the big predators are gone. The reefs in the ocean, the same thing, the population dynamics have messed up so that the fish that eat the algae off the reefs are gone because the big predators are gone and the whole population dynamic is wonky. So what we have here is a place of, an urban area where deer aren't eaten, they're not hunted, and when we do get some coyotes, they're immediately exterminated. So,
Bring in the wolves.
yeah. I'm not sure what so I've seen some storm detention ponds that look like they're deer traps. Maybe that's the answer. But I think it's more of just like, understanding that we have a really unbalanced system and some tolerance and just kind of changing the psychology and the social fabric of it. And it's a long-term curve. Like native plant gardening is less than 1% of the whole gardening world. It's really low volume and it's for the person that's really wants to do it at this point. But as water rates go up and water supplies go down and maintenance, like Vancouver, BC, no Roundup, not allowed to use it. Because they found with an independent, impartial, board that they don't want to have the long-term effects of Roundup. Well, what does that mean? That you have to weed torch or get your screwdriver out and go into your gravel driveway and get every little dandelion out, but this is kind of where we're going, is more of a practical, long-term approach. Let your yard be a jungle, and then the deer, you probably won't notice. Yes?
Do you have a list of some smaller dwarf native plants, or is there any other dwarfs being made somehow?
Well, native stuff is what it is. Everything that's made is kind of a hybrid, or I would consider native. But the King County Natural Resources website has an awesome tool for this, where you can choose, and they have a list of all, quite a few native plants, 150 or so, and you can choose height. So they'll give you all the plants that stay under 2 feet. And then you can look them up plant by plant and see which ones like moist shade, like hot sun. And it's a great resource, and you can get there by going to my website. And I highly recommend using that, because it'll just give you a list of 15 or 20 plants that meet the exact criteria you're looking for.
What's the name of that?
It's the King County Natural Resources. Do you use that one, right?
Yeah, and there's a couple, there's also the, I remember when Star something, and they also have photographs.
Starflower Foundation.
Starflower
Yeah.
Foundation's done a nice job.
Yeah.
Starflower Foundation.
We did a bunch of work for the Starflower Foundation in Seattle City Parks. And I can tell you a whole bunch about that organization. It's awesome, or I can answer some questions.
The other thing I would say is, I don't know how many of you are urban, but the cool thing to look online is the Pollinator's Pathway.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It goes from the Seattle University to Seattle City Park. And it's just a parking strip, and they planted native and non-native pollinators to try and move the pollinators between, I always say this, the campus, which is using no pesticides or herbicides of any kind, to a park that hasn't been, and so they could.
Volunteer park.
I can't remember, is it volunteer? I don't know, yeah, on the other end, I never get that far. Yeah. But it's incredible just to see what, a bunch of homeowners all working together did. It's just.
And I think that kind of is the big kicker, is like, when you never know if when you plant a native plant, where that seed's gonna go, what bird's gonna grab it, and it's just these ripples that you're making that you can feel pretty good about, rather than maybe ripples that are not doing good for the, surrounding community. She's been waiting very patiently.
Oh, thank you. When you were talking about landscaping green gardening. I don't know if you know Sue Taylor and her green gardening class.
Yes.
I can't recommend them enough to absolutely everybody here. Wish it was the heart of our master garden program. But my problem, and I told this to Sue to her face, one problem with the course I have is when we visit various people's homes, it seems like a riot. I'm enough of a sort of urban snob that I want my native landscape to complement the house and the house to complement my new forest growing. Is there anybody in town, perhaps you, who designs a forest so it complements back and forth?
Yes, absolutely. Probably Sue is probably the best at it.
She's a designer.
Yes.
I didn't know.
I just worked with her on a lawn removal, and we just did exactly what you're talking about. Where, and I've done a lot of that work too, and my goal would be to figure out exactly what you want. Before I got the nursery, I did some consulting with some landscape architects that wanted to infuse native plants into their plants. And so they would give me their plans that had, the typical juniper and, Acer rubrum and all this other stuff. And then they'd ask me to find analogs that were native that would meet the same niche. And it was actually pretty easy. There isn't the diversity of options that you have in the horticulture world when you're working with natives, especially in Western Washington. But they do exist, and so, you could, I've done that before where I've shown up and, people wanted me to install their plan that they got from the landscape architect, but they didn't really like the plan. But it's pretty easy to, just, add, figure out what's native that meets that same niche as the horticultural variety. And then, I think the main mistake people make with landscaping with native plants is they either plant them too close to sidewalks or buildings, or they plant things that are going to really aggressively spread. So like one is Nuka Rose. And I've made this mistake myself where people were, I had friends, I'm like, oh, look, I have all these extra roses. They're like, great. And then they lived in their house for 10 years and fought the Nuka Rose just like every year because it was taking over their vegetable garden and everything, and it'll jump the sidewalk and come up on the other side of the sidewalk. Very thorny, very aggressive. So now they have a rental house, and every couple of years they have to actually come in with a piece of equipment. So it's...
These are your former friends?
We live in New Zealand now. But I think that's kind of where finally we're getting to the point, or at least I am personally, where I can kind of say, yeah, this looks a little raw, or it looks underplanted now, but in 3 years, it's going to be awesome. And so, overplanting, I think, is probably one of the biggest problems we have with the native plants. It just turns into a jungle because the plants love it here. Yes.
Would you recommend a Nuka Rose for a restoration project though?
Yes.
I agree.
Sure, yeah.
They're real, the neighbors of mine, they're real worried about the jungle factor. But we ordered a lot of Nuka Rose.
Well,
You have to get in and get out of any weeks.
Yeah.
You have to move to New Zealand in a few years.
Well, if you don't want to have people in there, it's good. Like, if you don't want people living in there, or dogs, or if you have an open, sunny environment, it's going to be really aggressive. If it's in an understory, it's a little bit more contained, just because it doesn't compete very well in the shade. So 9-bark doesn't spread. Rosa pisocarpa, which you often find with Nuka Rose, spreads much less aggressively and is much easier to contain. And it's very nice, yeah. Isocarpa, yeah. We really only have 3 native roses in Western Washington, so that's an easy one. Yes?
We live out in the country and we might want to grab a hunk of pasture so we can view native planting. And I'm wondering how to deal with the grass, the pasture grass and the weeds, and how do you subdue that or deal with it while you're allowing your plants to water?
That's like the big question for gathering, I would call that more of a restoration project if it's kind of in a pasture or revegetation.
Yeah.
People have done everything from burning, spraying, sheet mulching, and I even know one where they got the Navy bomb squad in there and blew up areas.
Seriously?
Yes, it worked really well, because all of a sudden you have a meandering stream with one flows. And it was awesome, and they had no equipment out there, and it was just like, okay. You know, Volkswagen size pieces of sod, 50 feet in the air. It was awesome. I think that's what I
Sheet
should
mulch.
And,
I
yeah.
have so much fun.
So the kind of grass that you're fighting is kind of lead you to the solution. If it's reed canary grass, it's not. Okay, awesome. Then, do you have equipment?
Yeah, tractor.
Okay, and do you want it to be flat when you're done? Or do you want it to have like some topography? So you could actually manually dig out that sod and make your berms with that. Yeah, and then you'll actually have some lower than ground level areas too that will take wetlands. So kind of the thing with nature is it's very often in this area it's not flat. Although everything's kind of flattened out now, there wasn't before. And so each native plant has a little niche. Like for instance, when you see a native wetland, it oftentimes has very gradual sides. And so all these native wetland plants have a certain water depth that they can tolerate. And so they end up having communities based on water depth. It's the same when you have the upland and down part. Like for instance, a river system has a river, and then along the edges of the river, it has a natural levee that's formed by flood debris. Usually that's rocky or well drained. So right on the riverbank, you might have salmonberry or something that likes moisture. But right on top of the natural levee in the well drained, you have something more like 9-bar, which doesn't occur down in the super saturated zone. So everything has a little niche. So once you go, so the more the more diversity you can have in your planting areas, the more natives you can have. Yeah, and then if you don't have reed canary grass and you don't have knotweed or anything else like that, you can actually smother that stuff out. So with I wouldn't recommend weed cloth because wood chips would be awesome, yeah. And even you know, a few layers of cardboard on top of those berms that you made with your spoils, and then the wood chips on top of that. And then I would recommend monitoring that for maybe a season or two. If it's a big area, I'd recommend 2, because the goal would be to make your maintenance curve go like this. So you could go plant out in the field now and your maintenance curve will go like this. And you may never even see those plants. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. We do a lot of work like that too. Yes.
I've been living in the forest for over 25 years, and in lieu of what the conversation was going with maintenance, I have done my darndest to minimize my maintenance. But just this last week, I went out and just did a little bit of salal snipping. I mean, I've got a lot of madrona, Douglas cedar forest. And along the driveway that I look out to my kitchen window, there's a big madrona that has this big moss skirt, like a Christmas tree skirt, but it's this big, beautiful green moss. But I wasn't seeing it because it had this scraggly salal interspersed on it. And I just snipped out the salal, which means I'm going to have to go in and snip it out again. But for a little bit of maintenance, I'm going to see this most beautiful moss skirt out my kitchen window. So sometimes just a little bit of maintenance makes a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I work with a lot of people that when we're sitting down at the table in the very beginning, they say, look, I want low maintenance. And it's like, okay, but compared to what?
Yeah.
Like, what do you have now? Okay, well, we have lawn. Okay, well, so you're out there once a week, you know? And so that's kind of the trick. If you really want low maintenance or no maintenance, it's really a forest that's the only system I know that really has that. Or a wetland, or something that's, you're just allowing to go through its progression over 1,000 years, you know? But your situation is exactly what I recommend to people, is that, once or twice a year, go through with a metal blade weed whacker even, and just take it down, and you don't even have to haul the debris off if you do it, if you break it up small, you can just leave it. Yes?
You mentioned rhododendrons are native, but are hydrangeas native to?
Our native hydrangea is mock orange, it's about as close as we have. Yeah. And we have 3 native rhodies that I know of. I have 2 at my nursery. Yeah, I think that's as close as we have to native hydrangea.
What colors are your natives that you have?
We have the rhododendron macrophyllum, which is it's pink, big flowers. And if you ever been on Whidbey Island before Evie State Park, it's the native one that grows in the understory, very big. It'll get 10 feet tall. But rhodies take very well to being pruned back, and they resprout really well for that. And then we have a deciduous one that's more of an azalea, and it's white, kind of creamy white.
Do you have any recommendations for northeast winter winds? What would stand up to that, and the evergreen?
Out in the county?
Yes.
I mean, the tall Oregon grape definitely is super strong.
The Oregon?
The tall Oregon grape, yeah. It's pretty common, and so some
Yeah.
people don't
I
like it much.
Found a place for it, but that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Put it over there.
And that's kind of a really small set of plants in the native flora, is evergreen shrubs.
I know.
So there's a California wax myrtle, there's the Oregon grape, there's salal, and then there's rhodie, and evergreen huckleberry, yeah. And evergreen huckleberry would actually be pretty tolerant of what you're doing too, for the northeaster. And it'll take sun or shade also, so.
Yeah, it's kind of a semi-shady, semi-location.
Oh, it sounds perfect for evergreen huckleberry.
And I have a magic stuff that's been, it's now to the spongy thing with a black locust, I think.
Okay.
And I've been putting a lot of leaves and manure on it, and it seems to be breaking down. But it's out in the sun on the east side, getting a lot of hot sun in the summer.
Mhm.
What would be a good plant, native wise, maybe to plant in that? Because it's big and it's almost kind of rotting now.
How big would you want it to get?
Oh, 5 or 6 feet would be fine. I'd like to block the view of my next door neighbor.
I see.
Or shorter, but
Does anybody have a solution to that? A recommendation? I think so. The problem I'm having is there's probably like 25 things that you could have in that.
depends on where you can get water to, it's easy.
And if it's spongy wood like that, it actually is pretty moist already. And if it's that big, that probably wouldn't be an issue once it's rooted. But I mean,
Almost
there's
anything.
almost anything that will like full sun, And like Ray mentioned ocean spray,
Hazelnut.
hazelnut, would be
I've got some hazelnut already nearby.
mountain hemlock, or Pacific hemlock, if you wanted something that would get.
Oh, I don't want to really have towering trees next to the house.
Yeah. It could be so many different things,
Yeah,
herbs.
okay. There's one. Might be too silly.
Yes.
Do you have any tips on planting and growing grown trees?
Yes.
Next question.
So, last year I was fortunate to have,
The question, what was the question?
tips for growing and transplanting madrona trees. So, in the last couple of years I've been fortunate to have very small madronas in 4-inch pots, 1 gallon, 5 gallon, and then some that were actually growing bald and burlaps. And beautiful specimens. Over the years, I've bought madronas from a bunch of different growers and found that the ones that are grown in greenhouses, they use a cocktail of fungicides and other chemicals on them. And so once they get out in nature, it takes about 3 weeks for them to all die in pots at my nursery. I'm just watching them go. So I found a couple growers that grow them outside, and they grow, and it's easy to germinate. the problem is when you see one in the wild that has maybe 6 inches of top growth, it might have a couple feet of just a taproot with no fibrous roots. And that's why they grow in all those seriously harsh conditions in the chuck nuts, and on rock usually. So what these growers do is they germinate them in small trays, and then they cut the root but leave it in place. It creates a fibrous root ball, just like pruning the top, you prune the bottom. I did the same thing, and then by the time I get them, they're either in band pots or 1 gallon pots, and it's a fibrous root bound situation. It's not just a taproot. And so those are the ones that transplant really well. And I've transplanted on projects maybe like 60 of those, and probably like 50 are alive still. And what I would usually recommend is you dig out a hole as big as you want, 2 or 3 feet around, and maybe a couple feet deep, and I actually fill it with like stuff I never want to see again, like broken concrete, broken bricks, and just stuff you want off. And then put some real sandy soil in that, and then plant it on top of that mound so it's above grade. And just plant it and walk away. Don't water it. Don't, and the funny thing is that like at my nursery, it's a pretty small space, so everything kind of gets generally the same irrigation. And the madronas are fine in the irrigation, right next to carrots and nutta, So as long as they're above ground and well drained, they can take some water. But if there's any ponding, they're toast. Yes?
I would like to transplant some salal and deer fern from San Juan Island to my yard here in Bellingham. And I'm just wondering, is it better to get small ones or more established ones? And when is the best time to do that?
Deer fern transplants pretty readily. Smaller the better. Salal, different story. So you'd think something that is that strongly rhizomatous, you could just take a little cutting into a root. No. They're really, really hard. Like, I don't really know anybody that's been successful at it. And the same with the low Oregon grape, same idea. And you think about it, they grow in stable ecosystems. They're not a disturbed site. They're not something that pioneers areas that have had mass wasting or anything like that. So those I usually just recommend people buy a 4-inch pot, which we have a ton of. We also have them up to 2 gallon size. But that's really, I've seen that so many times. And tried it myself.
Unlimited salal field,
Right.
It's like just pick it up and pick it.
But you almost never see one little salal by itself as a true seedling. And I've looked for years and I've only found a couple. Same with like Devil's Club and some other things like that. So
If you put out some pots in that zone and let the seedlings create, I mean,
that's a great
rain
idea.
gutters, I live in the forest and my rain gutters fill up with all kinds of seedlings if you don't clean them out. So lay down a rain gutter piece underneath your salal and you'll get seedlings.
That's a great idea. Everybody hear that? Yeah. Then, salal seed, we collect it, and it is like a grain of sand. It's a little red grain of sand. And the first year seedling is like a 1/4 inch high. So they don't even grow in seed beds because you can't weed it. It's impossible. So most of the seed, or the salal that is commercially raised is from a tissue culture. And so there's kind of laboratory situations where they grow 10,000 of these in these little vials. And the growers buy them for like 15 cents and they grow them on. And that's a whole other side of the industry.
So it produces that blackberry, right?
Yeah.
So couldn't you just plant the berry?
Yeah. Once again, though, you have something that it's very hard for it to compete in an area where there's so much competition, where there's all these other plants that grow really fast. And salal is kind of funny. It can grow overhead in the shade on a stump in a pea pot where it has access to some water, but it's really high and dry. But in the sun, it stays short.
Going back to the Madrona,
Yeah.
I know it's in such trouble, probably will be around for the next generation. I assumed it needed salty air, salty soil, salty this and that. if I still have a rocky situation, could I grow madrona in my backyard? Which I'm in the most, best soil on Washington County.
Yeah, sure, and I mean, there's areas where it's so thick that people use them for firewood, and they're not coastal. Yeah. It's great firewood, it burns your pepper.
Why are they in trouble?
The question is, why are the madrona in trouble? There's a fungus that's killing a lot of them. When we moved into my nursery, there was a really nice, 20-footer, and that never fruited and just looked beautiful, and then it started putting out all these berries, which were all hollow. So it was just clearly a stress on the tree. And then gradually, branches started to die, and now it's all dead. And you see a lot of the islands right now, too. Some are resistant, I guess. We don't really know what's going to happen.
Do you have a water system under it that was creating that?
We didn't really change any of the conditions for it. And some arborist friends have come by and diagnosed it as that fungus. I can't remember what it's called. That is going around and killing them. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes. What's that? Green canary grass? Okay. So, there's been extensive studies by the Nature Conservancy trying to mow it, and when you mow it, it actually increases the stem density. So it likes mowing. And the way it works is it has pretty low viability from seed, but it creates some really, really intense root competition. So when you get a little patch of it, it just keeps growing and growing and taking over until it has the whole, all the area it can get. So digging it up isn't that great of an idea either. Like on a lot of commercial sites I've worked on, they have equipment, so they want to use it. So they bring in, they take all the sod of your canary grass out. Well, now you're left with mineral soil. All the good black soil is gone with the sod. And you probably still have the canary grass. So then, not only that, but it's all compacted with a 17,000-pound vibrating machine, And we plant almost exclusively with a two-stroke auger. I have 5 or 6 different sizes of bits, and they're 27-inch deep augers. So we try to decompact in place for each plant we plant and create a porous, fluffed up column of soil with all the soil horizons mixed together. And then, so the plant immediately wants to root deeply, which gives it some drought tolerance. And sometimes it works really well because all the area around that's still compacted doesn't get very weedy very fast. And these plants can move around. So to answer your question, the best thing I've seen is spraying. And if you spray correctly in the right time of year, which is usually in the fall or even right now, you can get 90-something% kill. We usually mow it and then wait for it to come back to be about 18 inches tall, so you have lots of surface area on the leaves, and then spray it, and then usually cover it with wood chips too. And then in the best conditions, then you monitor it for a year or two to make sure it's all gone.
Well, it's been implemented in the solar area, but we're also on the chain of lakes, ponds. So
Okay.
we can't, so I just kind of get up on that end.
Yeah. A lot of people have given up on canary grass and just decided that it's naturalized. And the long-term restoration or revegetation point of view is to grow a forest in it and let it shade out. And that's really kind of the most cost-effective means to do it.
Right now, my maintenance is let me go out my further and at least then it doesn't seed.
Yeah.
Seeds.
Yeah.
It just has
The seed is really pretty low viability. It's not.
Keep the goats in there and then it sneaks.
Oh yeah, it sneaks, yeah.
But anyway, I just ask everybody.
So if it's a small area though, we've had pretty good success covering it with, cardboard. And when I say cardboard, I'm usually talking about like appliance boxes that already are 2 or 3 layers of cardboard thick. I used to work at a cardboard factory, so I'm not a cardboard expert. And on a 100-yard long machine that actually made cardboard. And so the appliance boxes and heavier things are actually 2 pieces of cardboard that are glued together with starch. So there's 2 pieces of corrugated in there, maybe 5 or 6 pieces of paper. So it's heavy. And when you're cardboarding, if you use small, like, produce boxes or small boxes, by the time you get the overlap done, you only have 20 to 40% coverage with your cardboard. So you need 5 times as much cardboard. But if you have a 100 square foot piece of cardboard, you end up with, 50 or 60 feet of coverage with the overlap. So I've had clients that say, okay, we're gonna get the cardboard for the job. And I get there and we start laying it down and we start flowing. But when we bring our cardboard in, we bring it in on a trailer and we put it out right where the truck's gonna dump, and then we just move it around and just keep spreading from there. So that's a word of advice on cardboard. And for the re-canary grass part of it, if you do a very thick layer of cardboard and 6 inches of wood chips on top of that, the re-canary grass will come through, but it'll re-root in that new horizon of wood chips, and you can weed it from there.
The other thing is I got all the carpet from Source when they pulled it up, but the neighborhood is a dead end, and everybody, there's like 20 houses, and they're always walking.
Mhm.
I don't know if that would push their limits. The part I really want to get rid of is right by the road, and then the back area I can manage, but.
Cover the carpet.
Huh?
Cover the carpet.
Yeah, so you're,
It'll all blow away in the north wind.
can everybody hear
I
that?
can't do them.
Okay,
I can't do them all.
so she's suggesting covering your re-canary grass with carpet.
And I cut the strips so I can put my bulb rows and my other one for the birds,
Oh, okay.
so that the water still gets out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I've battled this, I've been thinking for 4 years.
Yeah. I kind of put cardboard or carpet in the kind of the weed cloth category, which to me is kind of a time bomb for maintenance down the road. Because the weeds will eventually root in it if you're not really on your maintenance. And the wood chips you put on top will turn to soil, and yay, all this stuff will come right in. And like quackgrass, and then next thing you know, you're following the quackgrass through the carpet, or through the carpet in this case, and then everything roots in the carpet eventually. So, yeah. Well, then once it's there, I'm not sure what's in
It would be
carpet.
permanent,
Yeah.
it would withstand the wind if I overlap it, right? And then the southeast, west wind can't catch it because it's not slow. And so, it would only.
Yeah. I would say if it was temporary use, it could be very effective. But
It
if it
springs
was,
the fall over 2 summers.
yeah, but if it was there for very much longer than that, good luck getting it out. I have pictures of hauling carpet out of projects with and we made like a cable choke chain like they use for logging, and we, kind of gathered the carpet up and choked it and then drug it out with my truck, and then it started unraveling. And so we just had all these, mile-long yarn everywhere, and then we started using the auger to plant. And so it basically has the whole auger wrapped up, or the worst case in that is a buried barbed wire. And then you have this piece of barbed wire going around. Yeah. I would recommend carpet.
After the re-canary grass is solved, what do I do with my horsetail, which are just,
We can scrub pots with it.
Yeah.
It's great for compost. It's full of silica.
can you get it to stop from sprouting? You could enjoy it.
Yeah. So my herbicide friends say that it's 3 years of diligent spraying.
This is throughout my garden.
Yeah, so I've done like awesome lawn removal jobs with a 275-gallon rain barrel that's all covered in cedar. It's part of the landscape, and then it goes into this beautiful steel basin that I collaborated with my blacksmith friend, and then it goes into a dry creek that's actually lined with clay, so that when you open the rain barrel at a trickle, it fills up this creek system, and it runs while he's entertaining his friends. And so we did like 2 or 3 layers of cardboard. It was a pretty wet site. We added drainage, and everything from the whole property drains into an awesome rain garden, and it works flawlessly. But I told him, I'm like, dude, you got a time bomb. So, you know, so most people, once they kind of understand that it's there, is they just pull it every, you know, twice a season really. Just go through and pull it and put it in the compost. There's another way to do it. A landscape architect from Seattle. We're on a 2-acre estate on Lake Whatcom where everything's just perfectly manicured. And he wanted us to pull each horsetail up and to put 2 or 3 granules of casseron down each hole.
Oh.
That's a long-lived herbicide that they put under pavement and stuff. Yeah. We didn't do it, but that's kind of where people go with it, you know. And this is right on Lake Washington, so we're like, no, we're not doing that. So it's really, you know, it's an ancient plant, sporophyte. It's from the, you know, dinosaur era, and yeah.
Maybe you can explain, you've used the word lawn removal several times, and I just found myself cringing. I'm curious with the lawn removal, with the idea of then growing forest, green garden after, that was why you were lawn removing, is that correct? Green garden?
I'm not sure what specifically green garden is, but it's
what Sue Taylor does.
Oh yeah, okay,
Okay,
yeah,
fine.
exactly, yeah.
And all her people that we visited, people showed us their green gardening lawns, so they had moved their lawn. And I just cringed thinking, well, why don't you put in the bushes and the trees, maybe, you know, give it some space, some mulch so it can grow, and let the forest remove the lawn, because as I understand it, that's the brown gold in that lawn, the O and A horizon. It's like you're mind stripping as far as I understand it, so I want you to explain to me why it's good.
That is a great question.
Oh, thank you.
So her comment is about the, you know, efficiency or even maybe the culture of lawn and lawn removal. There are a lot of ways to remove lawns. The typical one people think of is like bring in a piece of equipment, remove the sod, haul it off, and then bring in soil. We don't do it like that.
I can breathe you.
Okay. But that's, you know, so usually if you hire a contractor that has an excavator, it's got a payment on that thing, and he wants to use it. And so that's kind of what we get. We don't have one, but we rent one if we need it. So what we do is we basically just cover the lawn with a weed-free material that has the right components of for what you're trying to grow down the road.
A big mulch.
Yeah. Well, so this is kind of launch into another subject about hog fuel. Everybody know what hog fuel is? So how many hogs can you feed with hog fuel? Okay. Hog fuel it started out as a hog burner, which is they used all the waste wood back in the day to fire the wood mills and create steam to run all the equipment. So they had a kind of a conveyor belt that went into an incinerator that they blew air into to make high temperature, and it was called a hog burner, and the guy that invented it was named Hodge. So it was a Hodge burner, but then everybody started calling it hog, and so the wood they burned in there was the hog fuel. Well, hog fuel is this big moniker that can be almost anything. These, you know, like RDS and other dumps, they can grind construction debris, painted material, treated wood, some roofing. You know, there's a certain amount of inorganic or construction material they're allowed to have in hog fuel and still burn it and still haul it off to your site. But there are some purveyors of hog fuel that actually only have land clearing debris, and then you can get that product that has no or very, very little garbage or any kind of treated wood or anything that could be toxic. And that's what I recommend. So if somebody's selling you hog fuel, you almost need to go see the parent material. And what they do is they have a huge, you know, I can't even, like an acre across and maybe like 100 feet tall pile of wood stumps and rock and, you know, needles and leaves and branches, and they put it in a big grinder. And they grind it up so it actually looks all shredded. It has all the particle sizes in it because it actually has the soil, rock, everything right up to big chunks. And then they, some of them, the ones I use, they actually run it through a screen. So they take out the really big chunks that may not look good in a landscape, you know. And then they take the rest of it and they put it in a 2,000 or 3,000 cubic yard pile, and they age it for a year or two so that all the weeds are gone. But what you have is what I call, it's called immature forest stuff, because it's everything that's in the forest just hasn't been there forever. And it's completely weed-free at this point too. So that's what we use. And so we would treat the edges of the, so wherever you have your lawn that goes into a sidewalk or a driveway, if you've ever done much sheet mulching, then that's where the grass wants to poke back up. Yeah. So we dig all that out at an angle to the concrete, maybe like 6 or 8 inches deep. We take all that sod and use it for future topography in the landscape. And then we bring in the cardboard and we actually walk the cardboard into that trench we built around the edge, and then we compress hog fuel into those edges. And then we just spread it around the rest of the project. And we cardboard over the sod mounds that we've created. And then, so we leave most of the lawn in place, except for the areas that we don't want to have to dig up grass later. And we try not to haul anything off the site. We try to use it all in place. And then we bring in the cardboard, and then if we can, we have the truck dump right on the cardboard. And depending on what look you're looking for, or what kind of, like, if you want to have a vegetable garden, I wouldn't use hog fuel because it's wood-based, and you want more an algae-based soil for vegetables and for other herbaceous plants like that. But if you want woody plants, like natives, like kinnikinnick and salal, and rhodies, and salmonberry, and trees, and, you know, Spirea densiflora, and all the cool, you know, smaller shrubs, the hog fuel is ideal. And after the first year, you'll dig in there and you'll see strands of mycorrhizae and everything that's already in the forest, and oftentimes chanterelles or morels the first year too. So the place I've been getting my hog fuel is called Lenz. It's down in Stanwood, and they'll deliver up here too. Lenz. And ask for Jeff Keller and tell him I sent you. But they have a product that is, they have a really rough kind of straight hog fuel, and they have something else that's called wood chip mulch, which is kind of my standby because it has the big chunks and all the fines. And then they have another one that's almost like soil. And the beauty of this stuff is it doesn't look like bark all brown. It's actually black. So it really looks like a landscape when you're done instead of a hodgepodge. And then the trick is, you know, treating the edges of trails and everything with edging. It's kind of like if you paint a house and it looks okay, but then once you paint the trim, it looks tight and clean. It's the same with landscaping. So I think that's really where a lot of it is lost, is if you have a wood chip trail, like a cedar chip trail within a hog fuel field in your recently removed lawn, and there isn't a nice tight border between the trail and the garden, that's kind of where it looks more like a restoration or a landscape.
Thank you.
Yes.
It was causing me great anxiety that the spring gardening is causing an even bigger carbon footprint.
We just did a really nice one with Sue Taylor. It was her design up on Brownsville Road. And it'll probably be on a tour here shortly. Yes?
Where's the hog fuel?
It's in Stanwood at Lenz Enterprises.
Lenz, L-E-N-Z?
Yes. Yeah.
What was his name again?
Jeff Keller. And it's a small family-owned business that, I mean, I have so many nightmares about hog fuel. The first big restoration project or wetland mitigation project I did, the client got, hey, we got all this free hog fuel. And I was like, oh, great. And it had very bad access. And so these, you know, semi-trucks with live beds that just kind of push it out on a conveyor out the semi. They're dropping semi-trucks of this stuff and all over this hillside into this wetland. And I mean, it smells exactly like the dump. Like, it is just full of garbage, full of plastic, full of, and of course it was free because they couldn't get rid of it anywhere. And then they had to get a bobcat and distributed all this stuff in a wetland. So that was a legal mitigation that had 10 years of performance standards and monitoring that had to happen before the Department of Ecology would sign off on it. We had to replant those areas that they drove over with the Bobcat, like 4 or 5 times. And you know, I mean, the garbage was blowing around and everything. Anyway, so beware of free hog fuel. And make sure you know what the parent material is too, because the other thing that could happen is like, if you had some toxic waste, you know, theoretically, and you didn't want to pay for a permitted disposal, and you could mix it into something, which was happening in industrial scales in eastern Washington and all that. Yeah, yeah, because like, let's say cutting oil from a metal operation has a fertilizer component in it, and they've been busted for just renaming it and putting it into the fertilizer stream for industrial use. So it's really, it's scary. Like, you really want to know what's in here. Remember the Smith's compost deal? Does everybody understand what happened at that one?
No.
Okay. So there was a very reputable compost company that everybody loved their material. And they used a lot of cow manure in it. And the cows were eating grass that had an herbicide in it that didn't get broken down by all the stomachs of the cow. And it was...
And the neighbors oversprayed on their property.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, you know, everybody's just buying their normal compost as they do every year, and next thing you know, everybody's noticing these like stunted growth of their vegetables and even everything. And it turned out that that had made it through the whole life cycle and was now being spread all over the county. People were paying to have their...
How were they cows?
It just went through cows.
Yeah.
Yeah, it didn't get broken down. So be aware of anything you're bringing on your site. I'm pretty freaked out about it.
Well, people are bringing in hay for their animals from the east side.
Mhm.
How do we know that that's clean of the clearly?
I don't know.
Does anybody know? How do you trust the hay and straw coming from the east side? They're still using it over there.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a really good question.
The herbicide.
It's a big and growing problem, I believe.
Where do we get cleaned up?
Lens. Green Earth Technologies is pretty good. Green Earth Technology in Linden. They are a municipal compost operation, and they are really good. Like, for instance, if you're doing a rain garden and you have an engineer that told you you have to have a certain kind of soil mix, they'll mix it for you every year, like exactly what you want.
But you don't know what's in their compost. It sheds one day and something else the next.
There's
Pharmaceuticals.
Okay.
Yeah.
Pasteurized, I don't know.
Yeah,
They inspect the loads.
yeah. It's kind of buyer beware in that world. And I would, so I'm bringing this to other people's properties, and so I am super conscious of what I bring on. And it changes all the time too, so it's hard.
You're okay with cedar growth?
No.
Don't they have to follow tests to be
Yeah.
packaged and sold and?
Yes, it's tested periodically, and I don't really know what the protocols are for that, but I mean, we're talking, you know, like 10,000 cubic yard piles and a couple grams of testing.
Yeah.
So, and, you know, I don't know, when they used to test Georgia Pacific's air stacks and stuff, they had 6 weeks notice, you know, so, I don't know. Yeah.
I have a riparian restoration that my neighbors are doing,
Mhm.
and the federal government and, well, the fisheries enhancement has a nursery where we'll be getting a lot of plants.
Okay.
But they could really care less, the specifications could be alders and cedars. Okay, plant them, we'll give you 700 trees.
Mhm.
So we're trying to put variety in, I'm helping them do that,
Mhm.
but it's underwater now.
Hmm.
And I'm seeing a problem places wet soil in which I didn't think this stuff would really survive some of the flooding that I'm seeing. I didn't realize how we need the plants to get mature before we can handle this situation. But it's been dug and burned, and there's a big pond that comes out of this creek. It's a riparian zone of the creek.
Mhm.
And I've already put the order together 2 nights ago. So this is in 2 weeks, and I'm seeing things that aren't even gonna have a place to go. This is all water.
I see.
So what can you recommend to some water lovers that aren't, the Nooka Rose, I'm gonna have to maybe emergency contact, get some of those out of the list. But we want some evergreen huckleberry, you know, for producing. We've got a lot of sandberry, which I think can handle this, but
Evergreen huckleberry is a well-breed,
yeah.
kind of glacial moraine.
So maybe eventually when other things can, I mean, I don't want just willow and dogwood, you know? I mean, and there's reed canary grass.
Has an anaerobic tolerance number for the plants, which tells me they can handle water. I believe there's on the USDA plant list.
Expiria glassy?
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
That's a
They're
great
a little low on numbers for me. I need to, we'll probably order more. I'll take your card
Okay.
if you have a version.
Yeah, and you could get that stuff directly from multiple nurseries
Yeah.
that we sell seed to.
Well, we're considering it's 2 acres
Mhm.
of a planting.
On a
We're
situation like
considering
that,
throwing seed around and seeing what wants to.
one way to go about that kind of situation is to find yourself a reference spot and say, okay, this is what we want this to look like, and it has kind of the same hydrology characteristics, and go from that. And then maybe even phase it in, put in the structure first, like a bunch of willow groves and the
That's what
stuff
I was
that will require, and start to get your structure in, and then add the diversity later, potentially. Sometimes that never happens, but it'll come in later on its own too.
What about planting in the spring, would that help?
It can,
That's good.
yeah.
Chance to dig in a little bit.
Some spring planting needs to be.
We've done-
No water.
We've done planting underwater, and the way we did it was, we had a bunch of bamboo stakes. And you basically put on your hip waders and your long gloves you can get at hardware sales that come over your shoulder. And then you have your plants and planting bags, and you take whatever you got. In this case, it was a long-bladed shovel with a long handle. And you work it into the ground, and you follow the shovel blade and put your plant in, and then you tamp it with your feet, and then you put a bamboo stake so you know where you've been.
Yeah, and it's underwater.
Yeah.
It's underwater.
Completely underwater.
Well, like red twig, whips.
Yeah.
We're gonna do that with.
Oh, that's easy, yeah.
But eventually, I'm kind of thinking that we could just add some nice things in later.
Yeah.
You know, that has a bit of character. He doesn't want bushback either.
So
So,
sometimes it's nice to do islands of the bigger stuff, you know, for the first year.
like groupings of the trees.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And then-
that's
Yeah, and just kind of get the structure in as fast as you can. Things that you like live stakes are pretty easy to put in open water, and they do well.
nice. Up high, and then, which is always exposed right now.
That's fine. They'll do fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm thinking the water parks we plant later, they're sort of on big sides,
Mhm.
here and things like that.
Yeah, and you can plant almost all winter. So when we get some cold weather and things dry out a little bit, as long as the air temperature, general rule of thumb, as long as the air temperature is above freezing and there's not too thick of an ice layer, you can plant in those conditions.
Hey, we're about, sorry to interrupt, but we're about 5 minutes from our break for lunch. And so I just want to remind everybody to fill out the evaluation form, and then Bailey, will you be available afterwards?
Sure. Yeah, no problem.
About 5 minutes.
Okay, we're at 5 minutes. 4 minutes. Yes.
So you're talking about making boulders to finish the work, kind of things to use, or do you use
Yeah, so the question is, what kind of borders do I use in the landscape? One of my favorite things to use is steel edging. I use, so if it's flat or if it's got a constant grade, I use 20-foot long pieces of 4-inch wide steel by 1/8 of an inch thick. At Carlson Steel or Morse Steel or Z Recyclers, they all have it. And then I get a 1/4-inch round rod and I bend it into staples. So the edging is like this, and then it's stapled like that every 4 or 5 feet, and then you can overlap them to join them together. And the nice thing about them is they rust a little bit, and then they rust very slowly once they get a patina of rust. They're not plastic,
and they're called steel?
just flat stock, 1/8 inch by 4 inch. And they're about $30 for 20 feet. But if you've ever put in the plastic edging and had it do this on you, and you have to dig it in very diligently, this stuff, you can almost just make a shovel slit and tap it in place. And the beauty of it is it makes these awesome curves. And they're not, and so you can bend it, but you have to be careful because you'll kink it really easily, you know. And I've done it where we have like 93, and then if you have areas that are undulating a little bit, sometimes you have to use a little bit thicker metal so that it's deep enough for the deep areas, you know, and then you don't see as much where it undulates. I also use rocks. So sometimes we'll use like a piece of wood, like a round cedar branch that's 4 or 6 feet, or 4 or 6 inches thick, so it has some, you know, definition, and then end that at a rock, and then start the metal edging from there. And you just kind of, and then maybe it ends into a tree or a plant or another bigger rock, and mostly for paths we'll use that. And then I've also used it to build up kind of, what do they call those lines? Topo lines. Yeah, contour lines up hills. So we just did one of those right on State Street, actually, on the corner of Forest Street and Chestnut at a doctor's office. More questions? Yeah.
So you're using that like for like cribbing to be able to hold us? Okay.
Yeah, it's very elegant.
Yeah, I love that.
Yes. And then, you know, strawberry or kinnikinnick or whatever you use goes right over it too often. Any more questions? Yes.
I just wonder if you would give a little talk about the difference between seed grown plants and propagated, and if they're propagated in cell culture, are they going to be genetically identical? Is that
Yes.
an issue over time?
So it's a good question. You know, like there are a few kinds of kinnikinnick, for instance. The Massachusetts doesn't get the aphids. When you see the kinnikinnick leaves that are kind of all puffed out looking, that's an aphid issue. And so people like the kinnikinnick variety from Massachusetts because it doesn't get aphids here, but it's not really native here, but it looks just like it and functions. So we don't know where these tissue culture plants are coming from. I mean, it could be south of Washington, it could be California, it could be Montana, you know. And that is one thing that's very nice about the seed raised stuff is almost all the growers that are raising plants from seed. When we sell them seed, we'll sell them Thurston County, Indian Plum, Jefferson County, Skagit County. They grow it separately, and oftentimes in their catalog you can say, oh, well, I want the closest stuff. And it was pioneered that way with conifers because they found that they get increased growth for the timber when they get the right genetics. And we were kind of the first company that started to do, you know, just separate the seed out. And then the growers started doing it because sometimes they'll have a contract that they want to provide plants for, and the contract will say must be from within 50 miles. And they can, so now they have a unique product that nobody else can even compete with.
Native Plant Society has seed sale with the location.
Nice.
So if you go to Native Plant Society, seed sale, it'll say $2 package, 14 available, Thurston County.
Yeah, awesome. And I think that is, you know, like, when I first started doing this, you could get red osier dogwood from a company in Montana, Lawyer's Nursery, for half the price of everything else around here. And sure enough, all the commercial guys were like, yeah, give me that. And so, you know, now we have Montana genetics. You know, we don't know. But yeah, it's really now just starting to be kind of considered more.
Are there benefits then to the seed grown as opposed to?
Well, the other problem in the industry is that people tend to, like, there are nurseries out there that'll say, I'll give you 75 cents for every small sort of fern you give me. And so they're going into the DNR lands, and they're collecting 1,000 or 2,000 small ferns a day. And yeah, so Trillium is another one. Like when I buy Trillium for my nursery, I only buy stuff that's grown from seed because people are, you know, they're stealing that from the woods too. So if you can buy a plant that's grown from seed, then you're probably supporting a really small mom and pop nursery, or at least a good regional nursery. And yeah, I don't know what to say about that. I think we're actually over time. I want to thank you for all your great questions. help, please feel free to call or email or stop in the nursery and say hi. And keep up the good work. Thank you. We get started kind of really fast.
I live out
Oh, I have that.
Oh, I see. But I
I have checked out his,